Just pour montrer, just a bit of a map to show, in addition to all those pilot projects I was talking about, there are also a bunch of sort of non-federal initiatives that we should point out so some of them are on the map there. There's a phosphorus trading scheme in Eastern Ontario, I'll talk about it in a sec, which wasn't our pilot, but it's a very, very good model. Ag land reserves have been used in Ontario, Quebec, and BC over 20, 30 years to help some of this stuff, preserve agricultural land from development, which all provides some kinds of benefits. Tax credits have been used in Manitoba and Saskatchewan mainly for riparian zones and wetland reservations. The Alberta government they've got a greenhouse gas offset system, which is mainly drawing on the agricultural sector for credits, and they're also doing transferable development rights. That is another one of these tools. So not only do we draw on our own pilot projects, but we've drawn on the sort of experiences from all these other provinces and internationally as well to try to see what one can do. So in terms of, these are the kind of particular policy options I was going to talk about a little bit more. So I'll go through kind of the pros and cons of each of these and then try to draw together at the end some of the lessons and sort of path forward on where we're going to go with this stuff. So I won't read them because we'll all see them in a second as I go through. Regulation, I want to start with that one because it tends to be, it's a kind of a knee-jerk thing. It's actually fairly popular among the public. Something's wrong, you just make it illegal and it'll go away. But I think there are a lot of problems with trying to regulate these things, particularly on oh, I'm back. Oh, you're louder? Okay, all right. I'm dynamic. Dynamic. Yeah. I mean, they have an advantage. They can be objective driven. You can set a level and say, okay, that's a level. You got to meet that. And they're equitable. They treat everybody the same. There are some disadvantages, though. Non-voluntary in they're forcing a lot of people to do things. Sometimes there's no particular benefit to the public in forcing somebody to do something. They're kind of not very flexible that way. It's very costly to enforce, especially with non-point source pollution in an agricultural setting. You've got 200,000 farms in Canada. Any one of them could be emitting a little bit of phosphorus, and the problem is like it ends up in Lake Winnipeg or the Yamaska River or something like that. But you don't know where the phosphorus. You can't find the guy who one day put a little too much phosphorus on there, and they don't even know when they're doing this. It's not like just driving on the highway and watching your speedometer and then you know exactly when you're over the line or something. This stuff in agriculture tends to be very difficult. And then enforcing the stuff, you're going to go around to every single farm and see how they're applying stuff and where they plow and when they seed, and it's a mess. So not that realistic. The other thing about regulation is it's kind of inflexible, and it doesn't, like if you set a rule, then everybody follows exactly the rule, and nobody does any better than the rule. So I think there are incentive systems that can build on people's kind of stewardship ethic. And in the farm community, that's one of the neat things, is that there's a very strong stewardship ethic. People want to do they want to take care of their neighborhood because they live in it. It's a little different from some of the industries where the owners, the one place and the plant they own is 1,000 miles away, and they don't actually have to deal with the problems. I mean, most farmers are living right on the land, and they're very aware and knowledgeable about the impacts of their activities on the land. So for all these reasons, we tend to shy away from regulation as a solution here. Another common one that we have used, it's in the past, annual payments. You pay somebody so much every year, say per hectare, or to do something. And it's simple. It's a familiar thing. Governments have done a lot of this in the past. It does have a bunch of disadvantages, though. You're sometimes paying for something where that's not directly related to the benefit you're getting. If you're paying for somebody to, set aside land, well, one piece of land may be providing a lot more biodiversity than another piece of land, that kind of thing. So that if you're paying some kind of average amount, it can be a waste of money. it can create expectations of future payments. If you start paying, well, people expect, you know, and the politicians get very worried, because if they start paying now, then they're going to have to pay and pay and pay and pay and pay, and the taxes go up, and people don't like taxes, you've got to shut down the hospital and all that kind of stuff. So that can be a disadvantage there. Inequities with non-farm landowners, again, I mentioned that earlier. You're going to pay farmers to do something, why shouldn't you be paying everybody else to do the same thing? Well, you know, that can get even more expensive. Capitalization, I'll talk about that in a sec. It's where if you pay a certain amount of money every year for a certain piece of land, well, eventually that gets calculated, sort of imputed into the value of the land. So when somebody goes to sell the land, well, they say, and I'll show you a slide in a second on this, that let me do that right away. Pulled this off the internet. That was a land, like an ad in something called Prairie Rose Realty, selling land in I think it was North Dakota. North Dakota land for sale, Studsman County. This is a really pretty piece of land. When you drive up the east side and look down at the water and grass, it's a sight to behold. Average acreage, there's 160 acres, with 76.2 acres earning an annual CRP income of $2,300. That's $30 an acre. CRP, that's the Conservation Reserve Program. That's an annual payment program in the United States. It's been in place since the 1980s. They're paying $30 an acre on this piece of land. Well, the guy who sells the land, he just tells the next guy along, look, I'm getting $30 an acre on all this, and the guy figured, well, okay, I can pay my mortgage, it's so much, and I mean, the price of the land just goes up by the equivalent of $30 an acre. And you know, it sort of ends up distorting the land. You also can end up, you know, sort of impeding rural development in the long term, because if you're going to just raise the land values for the next generation of people who are trying to buy farms, you know, it can have a negative impact. So again, it's one of those things where you try to do something and you end up accidentally doing something a little different. So part of those things, I was trying to get some of the less attractive options off the table and get into some of the more innovative stuff. The other thing that we've done some work with is one-time payments, where you just pay for a conversion, or you give a partial subsidy for converting a land to, say, permanent cover, or for fencing along a stream to keep cattle out, or you know, sort of one-time payments. And these things, they can work in some cases. They're fairly simple. People are kind of used to them. But they do have some disadvantages as well. They're not suited to, particularly they're not suited to practices where there's an ongoing cost. So if there's going to be a loss, an income loss to a producer forever, then giving him a little subsidy 1 year to do it, or 2 years, is not going to solve the problem in the long term. It's not fair to the producer, and it's just not sustainable. Also, some of these things can have arbitrary parameters, and some of our own programs they'll set, like, oh, we'll give a 30% subsidy on something. Well, is 30 the right number? Maybe it should be 20, maybe it should be 50, maybe it should be 80. I mean, a lot of arbitrary rules have to be put in place there, so that they aren't all that efficient. So, and on to some of the more intriguing, some of the new policies that we're trying to look at. How are we doing for time? Half an hour? I'm already over half an hour. Okay, I'll speed up a bit. This best management practice insurance is something that was tried out in Prince Edward Island. Prince Edward Island. There's been a little bit of work done in this in the United States as well. The idea here is that if there's a practice that is beneficial to the public, that on average over long term is beneficial or at least neutral to the farm income, but it's new, or there's some risk involved to the producer. This kind of program is set up so that the producer will sign up to adopt the practice, but if there's a net loss in their income, that they get compensated for that net loss. If there's no net loss in income, then they don't get compensated because they don't need it. And this is being used in Prince Edward Island for nutrient management plans, where if they adopt a nutrient management plan that involves sort of testing the soil, variable application of nutrients and other practices, generally speaking, the producers will make at least as much, if not more money, because they're spending less on fertilizer. There's a little bit of risk involved, and that risk is taken care of. That if there is for something goes bad with the income, they get compensated for that. And so far, large Vincent Island, they haven't actually had to make any payouts because they've picked their practices. It's a way of sort of accelerating adoption of new practices, getting new practices to be tried out, and taking some of the risk of the new practices away from the producers, and you get a public benefit out of it as well. So, and actually, I think it's going to apply, could apply quite well to some of the practices that Mark's going to talk about in a second, because they tend to be beneficial to the producer, but there is some uncertainty or novelty about them that you want to sort of get over. Auctions is another one that we were mentioning earlier. This is something that they use a lot of. They actually do this a fair bit in Australia. They've got some programs that the idea of an auction is to sort of have a bidding. And these are usually what we call reverse auctions. Generally, an auction, you're used to an auction where you're selling something. You put the granny sofa on the stage and ask for bids. These auctions tend to be buyers' auctions, where you ask for bids for, say, doing something like setting aside a certain amount of wetland in a certain area, or setting aside a riparian buffer, restoring a wetland, giving up, say, easements, promising you won't do any annual cropping on an area, that you'll leave it as a native pasture. All of these can have a public benefit. You're not sure how much it's really costing a producer to give up a certain amount of revenue. So by having an auction process where you ask for bids, then producers can say, well, can figure, well, I can set aside that wetland, for $1,000, and another guy offers to set aside, a wetland twice as big for $1,000. Well, you might take the bigger wetland, and that way you can kind of keep a lid on the costs, but also generate a fair bit of public benefits. And it's a kind of a flexible mechanism that tends to get a little more sort of economically efficient. It's not just setting some arbitrary price and then giving everybody the same thing, and then you run out of money. Just show you a bit of the results of some of the research we've done on auctions. This was in Manitoba, I believe. The data, it was an area where we had very detailed cost data from farms in a certain area, and then parallel to that, they ran a couple of different types of auctions. I think there was kind of test auctions, but they were run with real producers and real data. The left-hand axis is dollars per acre of wetland. So this is, in economic terms, this is pretty much of a supply curve. In the left-hand axis, it's dollars per acre of wetland, and along the bottom axis, it's the amount of acres that could be bid out at various different prices. So you can see, okay, the dark line is the actual cost that would cost that producers would lose for putting in the first, I think this first 10 acres, and the next 10 acres, and the next 10 acres. So they were, the cheapest land could be got out at about $10 an acre, up to about 20 for the most expensive. And there are two types of auctions they tried. The uniform is the yellow line, and the dotted line was a discriminate auction, where I guess there was different types of land, you could have different rates. But roughly speaking, they did track the actual supply curve fairly well. So we're pretty confident that if they're designed properly, that these auctions can get close to the real costs to producers.